Welcome to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. As always, we are brought to you by Mountain Tough Fitness, where you can gain access to great programming to make you more resilient in the backcountry. If you're interested in taking your fitness to the next level, check them out and use the promo code Okayest30 for a free 30-day trial. Now, my guest today is a native of Colorado and is a lifelong sportsman and trapper. He's been critical in leading the charge via Colorado for responsible wildlife management to help preserve the rights of hunters and trappers in his home state and nationwide, specifically fighting most recently against Initiative 91, which is aiming to eliminate all mountain lion and bobcat hunting in the great state of Colorado. Dan Gates, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity and look forward to having a conversation and kind of spread the gospel a little bit.
Well, we will do some preaching today, Dan. I'm from the South, so I'm Bible Belt through and through, so we can do as much preaching as we want to. But before we get into all the hot topic current events, I would love to learn more about you and more specifically your ties to the trapping world. Can you actually recount the first memory in your life that you ever had being exposed to trapping?
Actually, I was 11 years old, and we were at a flea market where there was a dog racing track in Colorado Springs. And we left that flea market, my parents and I was 11. Obviously, I wasn't driving. And we drove past this liquor store. And behind the liquor store, there was a taxidermy shop, and up was a fur shop. And the fur shop was the trapping supply houses that some were familiar with, and they bought and sold furs, and they had a doorway between the two. The one was the Hunter's Moon taxidermy, and the other one was called Fur World. And I told my dad, I said, turn around, we got to go back there. And so he pulled around. Of course, the store, walked in and grabbed a six-pack. I ran over to the place next door, and like 45 minutes later, the truck was sitting outside in front of the taxidermy shop, and he came in and he said, "What the hell are you doing?" Well, that we figured we'd put him to work, so we're going to give him a job. And so I was impressed enough, and they were impressed enough to put me to work. So I was starting in the taxidermy shop, and so my mom and dad actually went and ran some errands and did some antique shopping and stuff, and came back around 5-6 o'clock that night, and picked me if he can come after schools, or if he can come on Saturdays, he can come work here. Well, lo and behold, the people that were doing that were all taxidermists and trappers and fur buyers and Western artists and outfitters, and that's where the game wardens hung out. And of course, anybody that was around the old trap supply houses, the fur shops, they understood a neighborhood hangout that was, especially from September through March or April. Nobody wanted to be there during the summertime because it smelled too damn bad, and anybody wanted to be there during the wintertime to the odor. But about that time, I started getting into some reading material, and I commented, I think, on Bobby Marshall's Mountainside podcast, that one of the things that we had was do book reports. And I found a book that just kind of touched my flavor a little bit and sent my senses into the next level. And it was called Give Your Heart to the Hawks by Winfred Blevins. And Bobby actually looked it up online when we were talking about it. But I read that book about 35 times, exaggerating wise. And I did my first book report on that. And it just sent me into another world. And then that fall, I actually picked up a Cersei predator call in September. Grandfather and I went out and called on Labor Day weekend, and we called in a bobcat Labor Day weekend, and he shot it with a 38 pistol, and I was hooked. And statute of limitations is over with, but that bobcat was illegal to harvest in because we didn't know anything about laws, rules, and regulations at that time. And to be honest with you, I don't think that we ever thought we were going to call anything in. Grandpa was reading the instructions to me as I'm trying to blow on the damn thing. And so we called that taxidermy shop that I was working in, and they're like, "Holy crap, and I said, "Well, I did. So what do I do with it?" And so we took it there, and there was a gentleman that worked for the Colorado Division of Wildlife at the time that knew me from the taxidermy shop, and so I didn't get the books thrown at me. It was not an honest mistake; it was complete ignorance for a and so I started picking up the trapping side of it and went through some trapper education courses that the first shop actually, on weekends that they would do trapper education courses, there'd be 10, 12, 15, 20 guys in there. And you could buy your supplies and so forth. And so it just got to the point to where um, I I was around it all the time. And when I was at home, I thought about it all the time. And I remember getting my first dozen and dyeing them. And we lived I was a very fortunate kid because we were caretaking. We lived in a one-room cabin, but we were caretaking a place that was about 6,000 acres, and it was on the edge of development really started. And I had a donkey, and I had a Honda 70 motorbike I used for my trapping, and I had a big Saint Bernard for a biggest dumbest dog you could ever see, but he was a good trapline dog. And so the first year I remember vividly, I caught like one red fox, one skunk, and one coyote, and but I was hooked. And the next year it turned into be something to where I was 13 years old, and I caught maybe 15 items and stuff. But stop and think, this is back in the 70s now, so 76, 77, 78, and and prices were decent. But about 79 and 80, 81, prices really started to increase. And so you start looking at a $65 price tag on a red fox, or $100 on a coyote, or $300 on a bobcat. I remember I sold 20 coon dollars a piece on coon. Guys now would turn around and kill their firstborn, I think, if they turn around and could get that sort of stuff. Uh, well,
Yeah, it's interesting.
we just we
I was gonna say I've talked to several folks who kind of grew up right during this fur boom of the late 70s, early 80s, or maybe came of age
hmm
and started to trap during that time. One question I've never asked anybody who was around that time frame, what was the driver for the increase in the prices at that specific time? Was it a foreign buyer? What was the main driver?
well, the domestic market was fairly well planted, and the was somewhat working its way through being established. I mean, there wasn't much of a Chinese market, there wasn't much of a Russian market, just because of trades relationships or whatever. But the domestic side of it was pretty high and mighty. The other side of that is, uh, while there was a lot of trappers, there was not very that produced numbers. And to
Hmm.
make a market, you had to have numbers. I remember that at any given time, that in Colorado Springs, nonetheless, there was a couple 100,000 people that lived in town at that time. Now it's a little over a million. But it wasn't uncommon to see advertisements for 6 or 8 or through, to pick up the collection of somebody's catch. And there was two other shops on the front range that sold trap supply, actually, just like what you see in the Midwest. The trap supply places and the fur houses. I think we had 5 or 6 in state at the time, and multiple individual buyers that would, the corner type guys. They'd show up to somebody's house, and they'd put an ad in the paper and meet somebody in a parking lot. But that not once a year, every week somewhere. And so that was the driving force. Not to mention the fact that it was a lot easier to acquire land to be able to pursue things on. We could still do things on public land here in Colorado, because we didn't lose trapping on public land until 1996 through a constitutional amendment, another voter initiative. But you saw that it was the changing of the guard, so to speak. I mean, it was almost like this influx of people on the landscape that wanted to pursue stuff, and there was to pursue plenty of the resource. And then, for anybody that was old enough to realize, back in 1987, the stock market crashed. I think it was October 11th, 1987. Maybe it was October 30th. But anyway, um, the fur market kind of tanked within.
Hmm.
And for most young people that don't really understand how it worked then compared to what it is now, uh, it took several weeks for that information to circulate around the globe with different buyers and different, country buyers and stuff. So it wasn't instantaneous. I mean, something happens now, bingo, everybody knows before the end of the hour worldwide. Then it was several weeks. So there was still procrastination and there was still speculation on the markets where guys were like, wow, I just heard this, but they're still buying and they were still buying at high prices. Well, that weeded out a lot of people really damn quick. And by the time that it finally circulated, if you ever heard Fur Exchange House, Dominion Sudak, I mean, they left. Uh, multiple other small businesses, small buyers, trap supply houses, tanners, garment manufacturers. I mean, it sunk a lot of people because there were a lot of livelihoods, and it just changed the scope to from where it is today. And I think that if that hadn't happened, the natural cycle of attrition would have just eaten us out of house and home anyway, just because of urban sprawl, the way people changed their livelihoods on the landscape as much as what they used to. Uh, and statistically, I'll just give this before I forget, but that back in 1900, the statistics indicate that 20% of the people lived in municipalities and townships and cities, and 80% lived on the landscape, farms and ranches. In 1950, it was a 50-50 split. And in 2000, landscape, and 80% lived in the cities. And so, I mean, there's a big difference in the changeover. Well, that's with everything. It's every sort of natural consumptive use material that we see in some parts of the industry grow and other parts don't. And I'm a collector. You can see all the stuff behind me here, but I'm a collector of fur memorabilia and trapping memorabilia and hunting memorabilia. And if you look at the old magazines, I've got magazines dating all the way back to the early 1900s, that you look at the back pages of those, and there was 8 or 10 or 12 pages of classified ads about all of this stuff. You can't find 8 or 10 or 12 pages on the internet combined of that stuff. That's how much it's been depleted. And I'm one of the dumb
It's
bastards
amazing.
that's hung around.
It's amazing though, and I'm curious. So in the late '70s, early '80s, you're a young Dan Gates. You've hung around a taxidermy shop that's attached to a trap supply house. You start to trap after you got that first bobcat with your granddad. Now you have built a life around trapping and being in animal control. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were that age, did it catch you and put the hooks in that deeply that you knew from that point on you were always going to work as a trapper? Or was it just kind of happenstance of the timing that you fell into it and then just stayed the course?
I think um, while I probably looked at things from a uh, entertainment perspective, a enjoyment perspective. I remember I was 18 years old and a buddy of mine was 17 years old, and we went to the Western National Rocky Mountain Rendezvous, and there was about 3,000 encampments, and it was outside of Vernal, Utah, in the Ashland National Forest, and we pulled around the corner, and it was a fully primitive camp, so they parked you in one specific spot. But when we went there, we were all in our buckskins, and we set a teepee as I was working at the taxidermy shop, and I was harvesting fur. And I remember vividly walking out of there, and if he hears this thing, he would laugh. But his name is Todd Clark, and I've been dealing with this sort of stuff ever since I was 12. But I remember vividly driving out of that place, 14 days of living there, and that's of our lives, And now we didn't go to that full extent. I know some people that have. I've just started getting back into the rendezvous side of things most recently of it. But I knew that there was a calling or a yearning or something that drew me into that sort of circle, or that. And so I guided hunts and worked in the taxidermy shop. The owner of the taxidermy shop was a really good friend of mine and a mentor. He died in 1982. They rolled a pick antelope, and That wasn't the smartest thing that they did, but they rolled it and killed him. And my life kind of went into limbo. I was actually living in the taxidermy shop at the time. I mean, it was easy for me to get work because I was always there. And so it just kind of bit me to the point to where it's like being outside and being able to be part of the management process, which I understood at the time because of the amount of game wardens and biologists and technicians that I was at the taxidermy shop, people that I still respect and deal with today, that are up and coming. Some of them have been in the agency, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, for 40 plus years. Well, Endeavor when I was 48, and so there's a lot of crossover. But we operated a trading post ourselves, where we bought in furs and had taxidermy for sale and mountain man accessories and Indian jewelry and blankets and furs and tourist trinkets and accessories. And at the same time, we started the wildlife control business. Well, actually, this will be our 38th year. And we to provide some sort of a additional summer income. Well, the best way to do it was to be able to supply people with a service that they weren't capable of, or that became necessary. And when I say necessary, back in 1996, for instance, when voters in Colorado passed the traps, body gripping devices, and cable restraint devices on for any reason outside of a 30-day exemption permit, the Division of Wildlife at the time used to trap things for people situations, and the humane societies used to loan traps out, and you could turn around and utilize those traps. Well, as Colorado started to expand in its human growth, two entities didn't have the resources to be able to provide free service or obligatory service. And so there wasn't very many idiots like me that were willing to do what we were doing. And we just expanded it from trapping squirrels and raccoons and skunks in cages, to solving a variety of different problems, to where we do human animal conflict resolution from everything from commercial entities, utility companies, power plants, golf courses, agriculture, industrial facilities, water treatment facilities, school districts, residential buildings, and you name it, we do it. And when they call us and they go, "Can you do this?" Oh yeah, we can do that. And I'm talking about, for the guy who doesn't understand what I'm referencing, I mean, we utilize genie lifts and we utilize heavy equipment and we do a lot of stuff. Or my line of accolades years ago. And so when you pull up and you have a 125-foot boom lift being delivered, is that costing you $6,000 a day, it's a little bit different than trapping skunks and squirrels at a per head price. And so then just all the other stuff that fold into that, that's where it leaves us today. And that's all part of wildlife management and all part of our lifestyle and everything that we've been able to accomplish, right, wrong, or indifferent.
That's, well, amazing. I want to back up a little bit. So, you were at the rendezvous, and a side note, because we could get on a really big tangent here, but
Yeah.
that feeling you said of going to like the rendezvous and that almost resurgence to wanting to be more natural, live more close to the land, and that was it for you. I do see that happening a lot today, myself included, being kind of an adult onset hunter trapper. Like, a little bit of, after COVID, after everything, like the rug's been lifted, and we see where we've been lied to so many times, being now in that where 80% of the people are in the population centers, only 20% living off the land, and it becoming more enticing to learn and to understand, how to be more self-reliant. So that's a side note. I think it's becoming
Yep.
more popular. I think that's why there is a renewed interest in trapping, a renewed interest in hunting in a lot of spaces, and we need to take advantage of that interest. However, I'm curious about 1996. So you mentioned there was a vote within Colorado that banned foothold, body gripping, and cable restraint devices. That's really the whole repertoire of trapping.
Yep.
We've seen it in bits and pieces in other states, but can you tell me what the driver was and then what the impact to somebody like you who was full-time trapping at that moment? Like, it reminds me of what happened in New Mexico recently. So I'm curious from like a mid 90s perspective, what was that like for you as somebody who worked full-time in the industry?
Well, a lot of it came on the coattails of what happened in 1992, where they banned the spring bear hunting with the use of, and so that group Sinapu or Sinapu, which then eventually came Wild Earth Guardians, um, they had significant editorial administration that was here at that point in time. Initiative 10 was ran through the legislature, so it wasn't a ballot initiative. It was actually it was a ballot initiative and isn't constitutional. And what they made such good traction uh, that in 1996 it became a constitutional amendment to change the makeup of the way fur-bearing animals or predatory animals were harvested. We lost that 52 to 48% at the time. And while there was going to happen, just like what they didn't think the wolf deal was going to happen in 2020 here, uh, the the leadership of the organizations that were trying to stop, in my mind, compared to today's numbers, were very antiquated, and they were very uh, non-partnership oriented. And I say that because what we've been able to accomplish now doesn't mean that we're going to win come this November. But when you have advocates and allies on your side, it makes it a lot easier to be victorious. And they didn't have that and said, "This is happening. We need your help." And I made some of those suggestions at the time, but I wasn't part of the cult. I wasn't part of the clan. I wasn't part of the inner regime of those. Now I still worked with all those guys, but I wasn't on boards and I wasn't on committees at that time. And but I remember vividly at a time when I was in high school talking to these guys at some of these modern contemporary trapping rendezvous that were in Colorado. They would have 4, 5, 6, 700 people show up. I mean, that's a pretty big turnout, and especially on a smaller organization type deal. But the association used to have, in the heyday, over 1,400 members. And guys and saying, "Hey, it'd be cool because I started a trap shoot uh, club in high school. It'd be cool to be able to have some some trapping instruction." And I remember, and I won't mention the names because they're not here any longer, but we don't want to do that. If you let people know what we do, they'll try to take it away. And that was in the early 80s. Now, look, I was one of the dumb kids that was working at the taxidermy shop in the first shop, which is kind of funny, which I'll just segue this real quick. But for yesterday, my son, who works in this business with me, he's 32 years old. He just traveled. He's going on vacation. He just traveled over to the Western Slope and spent 2 days with my old mentor, who's in his mid 80s now. And so Dick has kind of taken on the godfather for my kid because I was the one that was living in the taxidermy shop. So there's a cool relationship there that it shows that not only does my son have an interest, my mentor from 45 years ago has a big interest in it, and there's a lot of connectivity there. But to see how degrading it was for those guys compared to what it was for me was hard enough to be able to examine and be able to comprehend. And I say that for a reason that I think anybody listening to this could understand that once you've lived it, it's not as tough to swallow.
Hmm.
It's the ones that have never that it's the hardest on. And I think that that's one of our problems when it comes to conservation and wildlife management issues in this country. And I say that tongue in cheek, but you look at the game wardens that I've got right now that I deal with on a regular basis that are 30, 32, 35 years old. They didn't experience that. When they got in through grade school, junior high, high school, college, became game wardens, they could never trap, ever. So it just wasn't there. Just like if you look at the history books, you start taking history out. If you start taking tradition and heritage out, pretty soon it's non-existent because the people that are there don't ever remember it. And I think that's some of our biggest problems is that when it comes to defense of the North American model and wildlife conservation, we and I see that there's an opportunity for us to be able to try to capitalize on. And so I use the examples of 96 and even in 2020 and making sure that we fully are capable of taking advantage of the things that are before us now, because we have to learn from the past and we have to learn from previous examples. And if we don't, we'll end up losing this as well.
Yeah, and it's scary, as myself, a 35-year-old, so I'm in that same bracket as your son.
Yep.
Obviously, I'm stepping into a state where we still have largely all of our rights from a trapping perspective, though those are being infringed quite quickly. Um, I think that's a very pertinent point. Like if you weren't exposed to it because it wasn't around like when we were growing up, it's very easy to forget about it. And one of the questions that I ask a lot of these guests who've been in the trapping industry their whole lives is when you talk to somebody who's not a trapper, what is their number one thought about trapping? And most of the answers are, oh, I did not realize people still do that. Like
Mm-hmm.
there is a large
Mm-hmm.
education gap across the nation, trapping specifically, but I would even argue into the premise of hunting in general. Like, why do we hunt with hounds? Like, there's a heritage there, and B, it's probably, a good thing. There are a lot of just education gaps nationwide, I think, because people just weren't exposed to it, myself included, growing up.
If you haven't lost it and it was already gone before you realized you wanted to do it, you just accept it.
Mhm.
You might question it, but you just accept it. I mean, one of the most frustrating things that I see, and of course, we've been here a long time and been established, is people that would move into state from Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Tennessee, Michigan, coming to Colorado, move into state. They find out in the last 12 years that I'm the dumbass president for the Colorado Trappers and Predator Hunters Association, and they call and go, "Why did you lose trapping? When did you lose trapping?" I mean, they came here thinking that this was the land of the free, home of the brave, and it used to be, uh, but it's not so much anymore. And the things that we've lost that people never realized that were gone, did you ever really have them in the first place? I mean, that's that old adage, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, does anybody hear it? Well, does it make a sound? Well, it does. It's just that nobody's there to tell you about it. And I think that that's the thing that is so frustrating to me, uh, because of my participation on conservation and all the issues that I've decided to take upon myself and engage in. I've been appointed by this particular governor, and I was appointed by the previous governor. And that says a lot on the conservation side from a kid that used to live in the bathroom of a taxidermy shop, for crying out loud. And I don't have a college education, but I've got anecdotal experience and boots on the ground experience and common sense and logic and knowledge that was valuable at different levels. And while I think that we have made some headways in the conservation side of things, we've done a piss poor job, industry wide, hunting and trapping and conservation efforts to tell that story to the general public. We've talked to ourselves, and we haven't done a very good job of talking to ourselves. Uh, if we can't get that message across to the people that we work with, that we congregate with, that we play with, and that we, in our families or neighbors. And I think that if we'd have done that in the trapping community when they first started, not just to defend trapping, but to educate the public on why we need to defend trapping, I don't think we'd have been near in the boat to what we are now. I mean, trapping is the ugly two-headed stepchild. As I said, it's it's, that's the lowest hanging fruit that you could get. And probably realistically, overall, the most underfunded and least organized sector of conservation.
And
And
that makes
and
sense. And it's as somebody on this side of the fence now, like it's true what you're saying. And it always seems like trapping is the first domino to fall in that conservation life cycle. So, two questions out of that from me to you. One is, with that being always the first domino to fall, since 1996 in Colorado specifically, like what has been the ecological impact from your point of view by banning trapping? Again, we talked about footholds, body grips, and cable restraint devices. And the second question is, what is the biggest misconception of trapping that leads to these, the ability to knock that domino over so easily?
I think a two-part question. Um, the biggest domino side of it is that people don't understand the inner working, intertwining relationship of multiple species when it comes to urban development, urban sprawl, agriculture production, human health and safety, protection of livestock, habitat conservation, species conservation. They don't understand that it's part of a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox. It's part of a plan. Now, is everything that I'm saying going to resonate with every single person? No, I understand that. But I have a different perspective, and the biggest perspective I have is because I'm in their houses because of our business. I'm in their bed and breakfast. I'm at their ball fields. I'm in their crop fields. I'm at their high rises, and I'm in their old schools, and I'm in their police departments, and I'm in their multi-million-dollar homes, and I'm in their trailer parks. People's perspective and perceptions of wildlife, in my opinion, is at the lowest that it has been in the last 50 years. And the reason being is because we become separated from how our natural resources are stewarded and managed, who pays for it, and why you have to do it. When people keep telling me, well, we need to make it like Yellowstone, or they were here first. Well, maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but this ain't Yellowstone. And unless you're going to turn around and get rid of 5.9 million people in Colorado, it's never going to be Yellowstone. So there has to be adaptations. There has to be some nimbleness and management. And I think that there's not enough guys like me that are in people's houses to be able to spread the word about the necessary means of animal trapping in the most humane and ethical manner that you could possibly engage in. And while I made a very sizable living off of somebody else's inability to provide things for themselves, it wasn't going to be that way if trapping kept going the way it was going, because there would have been people doing it for free just to be able to turn around and go do it. You take all those other components of somebody's livelihood away, something in their house, something in their attic. They hear that noise in the basement of their crawl space. Well, they're not just going to get the guy who wants to trap muskrats or trap red fox to come over and crawl around in their crawl space to do that. So it's been an economic boom for us since 1996 because of human population growth, urban sprawl, more interaction with wildlife, more conflict, and people looking for reasonable solutions that are economically feasible, that can be a benefit to the wildlife and the people that have the problem. And that's the problem that we don't do a very good job of, is what do people provide for wildlife when we act like we just take wildlife off the landscape and we provide it for ourselves. There again, we don't tell a very good story when it comes to that. We might tell it at a Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation banquet. We might tell it at a Muley Fanatics banquet or a Bighorn Sheep banquet, but we don't do a very good job of telling it to the soccer moms or the guy who drives UPS that doesn't go outside of the freaking city, or the somebody in Denver that rides their bike to work.
Mhm.
They benefit off of everything that we do, and trapping is one of those benefits. It's just that 17 fur bearing species in Colorado, Most people don't pay attention to them until they find out that you might be doing something with it. They don't know that it's appropriately managed until
Mm.
you educate them about it. They don't know that they have 4 to 8 or 12 per litter, maybe twice a year. They think that, it's like an elephant. You have one and it takes 2 years to have it, and you're never going to have any if you take any of the surplus off. Explaining to the public is the hardest thing that we've done. And I've been trying to figure out the secret matrix to that since 1996. And while we've made significant headway, and since my involvement on the political side, we've changed laws and rules and regulations in a state that doesn't trap. We've pedestalized what we do while the antis are trying to marginalize or bastardize it. But you can't educate people that don't want to be educated, and that's where the antis are. But you can damn sure educate the people in the middle. They're curious and they're concerned. They're not antis. They just have a different perspective because they don't know. They're ignorant about it because they haven't been taught.
And I think that is an interesting population. And it's a population, frankly, that I came from that, what I would say is hunt curious or trapping curious, where I started to question the lines of my white picket fence suburban lifestyle, through some human animal conflict, right? Where, you might have the possum in your attic and you talk to an animal control specialist who comes by and can talk a little bit about the problems they're having. And, for me, that pushed me over the edge to be way more curious and get me to the point where I'm at now. But I'm curious, like when you are dealing with these human animal conflicts and you do have an opportunity to talk with the soccer mom, like what are the key talking points that we might be able to give to some listeners of just like really high level, like here's a few things to say to people who might be in that middle ground, who aren't staunchly against trapping or animal control, but also just don't have the perspective to understand why it's needed.
I think, and I was told this, and sometimes I flap my lips and put my alligator ass in my crocodile mouth. I mean, it's there's a lot of things that people don't realize that we can make a difference on. And I honestly believe that if you can bring it back full circle in some capacity of why people feel the way they feel and what would they feel if it was to affect them. And so, I got into a conversation not too long ago. I was selected to sit on the stakeholder advisory group for wolf introduction here. And one of our board members that was selected, I think there was 18 of us. One of them was a very educated woman, was a county commissioner, ran a restaurant, but she was about as against the killing anything as you could possibly get, except for the beef cows that they killed for her restaurant. And so she saw value in that. And so I just made the example. She said, why would you advocate for killing a lion or a bear or a wolf, for God's sake? She said, they have to eat too. And I said, well, you own a restaurant. She said, yes. And I said, so do you have mice in your restaurant? No. She said, the health department wouldn't allow it. My customers wouldn't allow it, and I wouldn't allow it. And I said, well, a mouse to you is a wolf to somebody else. A mouse to you is a squirrel in somebody's attic that's eating their wires, or maybe it's raccoons in their chimney. If you can put it into perspective to them of some capacity, if they have a really nice manicured yard that's all in the ground sprinklers, and they got people that come and take care of it, but they're adamantly against all the stuff that you're recommended to do, why would you want to turn around and do what you need to do to solve their problem? You try to solve it effectively and humanely. But if they got gophers in their garden or snakes in their cellar or bats in their belfry or whatever it might be, if it affects them, they start to care about it. The flip side of that is if you can prove to them and show them how what we do as conservationists and trapping and hunting benefits them, show them the benefit of what we do and they don't have to do a damn thing for it. Give them the examples of what it takes to be proactively managing our wildlife sustainably in perpetuity. Get them to understand that you and I and every other sportsman and women kick money into the pot by buying licenses, and our success rates are normally less than 20%. Sometimes maybe it's 9 or 10% if you get into elk hunting or whatever. but we do it repetitively. So that makes us more successful. But it doesn't mean that the numbers go up so substantially that the populations don't benefit off of it. When you explain to them that they get the benefit of our labors, of our dollar, in what we do for conservation, they start to look at it from a different light. Now, I'm not going to say that you're going to turn antis over and they're all going to support everything we do. But the middle of the roader that we talked about, that 75 to 80%, you can sway them by putting it into their plate. Say, if there was a squirrel in your attic that was eating your wires and going to potentially burn your house down, what would you do? Well, I would have to get him out. And then what would you do with him? Well, I would take him somewhere. What if it was the middle of December and it was 9 degrees outside and he's been living in your attic with his family? What would you do? Well, isn't there a squirrel sanctuary to take him to? No, there's not. So you put it back onto them because there again, recommendations, suggestions, and solutions to a problem, especially when it comes to wildlife that people don't understand, you have to educate them. Don't argue with them. Don't try to taunt them. Don't try to say I'm right and you're wrong because that's what they're saying the whole time. You have to give them reasons to believe you as the expert and the person that has the tradition, the heritage, and the personal perspectives of what you do, whether it's deer hunting and you're sitting in a tree blind, or you're on the ground calling coyotes, or you're setting muskrat traps in a swamp. You have to be able to connect that back to them in some capacity, or you'll never ever make any headway about why I need what I want because you have no benefit off of it. No, they benefit off of it no matter what.
I love that. And I think a lot of folks listening can probably take that advice and hopefully put it into practice, and something that I'll be doing too. So, Dan, real quick, I want to do just real lightning round questions on trapping specifically. So, you'll have to reach back into your youth a little bit when you were back foot holding and doing other stuff. Then I do want to touch on, Colorado for responsible wildlife management and the current fights you're having within the state. And then we'll wrap up. But to hit a few of these questions, we cover and talk with a lot of new trappers. A lot of our listeners are trappers who are, relatively new or just getting into it. Can you remember what the biggest mistake you ever made on your trap line was?
Not paying attention to detail, and that detail might have been um, anchoring a trap. It might have been setting and bedding a trap. It might have been cleaning and dyeing and waxing a trap. It might have been cleaning the trap after a catch. It might have been not taking the information that was given to me by experts, by old time experts. I mean, keep in mind, when I grew up, I was literally being taught by guys that were 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. I got a chance to go with some of the guys that were badass trappers. I mean, I got a chance to know some of the what I consider to be the most remarkable individuals in the trapping industry, and they never had a name.
Hmm.
They didn't have to turn around and make lures. They didn't do conventions. They didn't do seminars, but they were some of the baddest sons of bitches that you could possibly get. They knew every rock. They knew every crevice. And one of the things would be is that I tried to take shortcuts because I knew better. If they had a shortcut, they would have told you about it and you would have known it. You shouldn't have to learn that shortcuts don't work until you find out that they just don't work. So
That makes
attention to detail would be the first and foremost.
that makes sense. And then, follow on question on early mistakes. What's the biggest mistake you made in your first shed?
Um, to this day, and my wife hates it sometimes, and anybody that comes in and runs a trap line with me now, and we run the 30-day exemption trap lines for damage control. And we also do live cage traps. Everything that we do on public land for recreation has to be cages. Anything on private land has to be cages.
Hmm.
But one of the biggest probably mistakes in the first shed was not tending to your catch when you got home. To this day, I come home, I park the truck in the barn, I unload stuff, I take it into the shop, I change clothes, and I do my work, and then I go in the house. People that I've seen that want to put a lot of effort into the catch that then don't spend a lot of time preparing it and getting it ready appropriately. It's a lot easier when you go inside to sit down for dinner. You come back out and you're tired as hell. If you come back out, I'll get to it in the morning. And I
Hmm.
think just procrastination and putting stuff off would be the biggest thing that I learned not to do, and I don't do it to this day. I mean, it's my my 12 and 15-hour days means that I don't take very many people more than once because they say I'm not doing that crap again. So
Yeah, I think that's a pretty universal thing. It's a second full-time job if you run any sort of a line and you do it appropriately. Um, Last lightning round question on trapping. With your experience with those really badass old timers, is there any trap technique or tool that they taught you about that you would never go on your trap line without or not do when you go out on your trap line?
drags.
Drags.
I use drags more than I ever have, and some of that's because the ground is too damn hard for me to pound into it without busting my shoulders out. But but there was a reason that those guys used them, and I didn't use very many of them until probably 15 or 20 years ago, and then got to a point to where it's like, I'm going to start using some more of these, and it's been much more effective, and it's I think it's better on the animal, um, in a lot of different circumstances, and it's it's easier to hide a catch, and it's easier to be able to move fast. I mean, anybody, I get a kick out of these guys, and not to get off that subject, but these guys that I see in videos or whatever, and I don't watch a hell of a lot of them, but in demonstrations or whatever, and they drill a hole real easy with a drill, and they turn around and put a stake in the ground, and it's an earth anchor, and they pull on it, and nothing's going to come out. And I'm thinking, you're not doing that shit in Colorado in the middle of winter.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of things where drags come in handy if the terrain will allow it, because you are not digging a very good trap bed, and you're not digging a hole, and you ain't getting a stake in the ground. And so drags would be my number one thing to people to look at.
Awesome. That's great advice, especially given terrain, especially out in Idaho in the West.
Yeah.
Um, and something I'm getting more comfortable with. Last thing, what do you see as the future of trapping?
Short term, a struggle. Long term, an eventual demise. Um, if we don't get our shit together and figure out how to solve some of the problems internally and externally and message wise. And I'm talking about a national movement, and that doesn't have to be 178,000 licensed trappers like what Mark Duda says that we have. It has to be a significant amount of the trapping associations, national and otherwise, to do what we're doing here on this issue for the mountain lion and bobcat ban, and stop sitting around waiting for somebody else to do it, and stop sitting around bitching thinking it's not going to happen, and stop procrastinating saying that we woulda, shoulda, coulda. Just get out and do it. We do it for trapping, we do it for duck hunting, we do it for elk hunting. Why the hell don't we do it for the fight?
And that's a perfect segue into Colorado for responsible wildlife management and the fight you do have right now. I'm going to pretend to be ignorant here, and especially for listeners who might just be trappers, maybe they're oblivious to what's going on. But can you give like the 1 minute spiel on what's happening and what this group that you're a part of now is fighting for, and then maybe tie it into how it translates to the bigger issues of trapping? But let's talk about mountain lion and bobcat issues in Colorado real quick.
So mountain lion and bobcat issues have been the low hanging fruit, not only here but other states, for quite some time. And back in 2019, we defeated a measure unanimously at the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. We did it again in 2020. We did it again in 2021 when we forced the adversaries to withdraw their petition. They decided to go to the General Assembly at that time and run a piece of legislation to ban the harvest of mountain lions and bobcats, which we defeated then. And so they decided to double down, taking advantage of this General Assembly and the gubernatorial administration, and run a ballot initiative that we fought diligently for the first 4 months of the process, and which we got what we needed to as best as what we could through the title board and the Supreme Court, Secretary of State. But in Colorado, like 26 other states, they have the opportunity to run that ballot initiative. And once we get the title changed or not changed, if they can get the signatures, it'll be on the ballot for November 5th, 2024, to ban the harvest of mountain lions, bobcats, and the red herring as lynx. Even though we can't harvest lynx, they put it on there because they had admitted that under no uncertain circumstances, if do they ever want lynx harvested, and if they ever became off the threatened or endangered list, they wanted to make sure that we could never harvest them. So the group that and I hate to give them credit because I think they're a bunch of lunatic bastards, but Cats Aren't Trophies is the group, and they are funded by the former CEO of the Humane Society of the United States. That when he got canned for his improprieties within the organization that he was running, he went out and formulated. I think it's two groups actually. I haven't fully determined what it is, but it's the Animal Welfare Action Institute for a Humane Economy. He hired this individual from Washington that was working for Wild Earth Guardians and Wildlife for All, I think is what it was, in Washington. She came here and now she's running the campaign to turn around and stop these efforts here. And we have, since last year, not only been fighting through the court cases and getting it to a point to where it was somewhat palatable for both sides, even though it's not to our best liking. It's not to the opposition's best liking either. But we are dealing with what we have to deal with: fundraising, starting a messaging campaign. We started an issues committee, and the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management is a 501c4. So if anybody contributes, it's not tax deductible because it's a campaign, just like any presidential campaign or congressional campaign. You can contribute, but you're not going to get a deduction out of it. And so right now we are waiting to see if they get the signatures. They've got until July 5th to get the signatures. If they get those signatures, then they have to be certified by August 5th. And if that happens, then we'll be in a full out onslaught battle with all the funds that we've raised and all the funds that they've raised, trying to target that middle of the road, 75 or 80% of the people, to vote in the right direction on November 5th. And the interesting thing about this, and I know you wanted a 1-minute dissertation of this, but 6 months of fight and battles you can't talk about in 1 minute. The interesting thing about this is it looks like it's a mountain lion and bobcat deal. And I want people to listen real closely when I talk about it, not just here, but any place. It's a statutory definition change of trophy hunting. And it specifically mentions that in the measure. And the difference between statutory and regulatory is the fact that the statutory side could set a significant precedent in any state for any species or any method of take. It would be the first time in the United States that trophy hunting would be defined. And in their definition, in the measure, it defines trophy hunting as intentionally killing, wounding, stalking, pursuing, or entrapping a mountain lion or bobcat. Intentionally killing, wounding, stalking, pursuing, or entrapping. Now, I want to say, I don't know anybody that intentionally wounds anything. So that's how stupid and how much lunacy is involved in this conversation. But when you turn around and start to define what hunting is by putting a catchphrase term in front of it as this is trophy hunting, you could turn around and say intentionally killing, wounding, stalking, pursuing, or entrapping an elk or a deer or a duck or a pheasant or a bighorn sheep. We've got 78 game species in the state of Colorado. In theory, you could turn around and say any one of those if you had enough ass in your britches and enough money to do so. Defining hunting by defining trophy hunting with those terms will set a statutory precedent to where if it's allowed to happen here, tell me where the hell they can't go next, where they have a favorable General Assembly, a favorable gubernatorial administration, or maybe even on a national level. Yeah, would we fight it? You bet. We would probably all join forces. But it'd be a hell of a lot easier if we'd get the support financially and otherwise from our community, the trapping, the mountain lion hunting, the deer and elk hunting, sportsman community as a whole. I don't care whether you're a bow hunter, a muzzleloading hunter, a waterfowl hunter, an angler. It would help if we got the support, which we've been getting so far, to say, let's not let them go any further than Colorado and let's stop it there to where we put our flag in the sand and we support the efforts. We provided a solution. We provided a recommendation and a fix to something that they want to turn around and define as there is a problem, and there's not.
And for listeners, we'll go into in just a minute, Dan, of where people can go to look to maybe help, and whether that's sending funds, reaching out, sharing material. But I want to note for people listening, especially trappers, right? Like, we've seen it in New Mexico, we've seen it elsewhere. Like, you know, it starts with something like this, and we should all be very aware with eyes wide open. So, Dan, first off, thank you for all the effort you're putting there, and the team. Before we go into where folks can find out more, I have one last question. I always end with a hypothetical for people. The question I have for you is: would you rather be able to solve the mountain lion and bobcat issue in Colorado the way you see fit, but you would have to live with a staunch anti-hunter for the rest of your life? Or would you rather solve the mountain lion and bobcat issue as you see fit, but only be able to eat a vegan diet for the rest of your life? Well, no good outcome here, other than you actually get to solve the problem of bobcat and lion hunting, and that definition of trophy hunting not coming to fruition.
I think that if I had, I mean, it's hypothetical. If I had my druthers, I would I would rather eat the animal rights activist and then claim to be a vegan, because if they're that much, then I would be a vegan anyway, because they would be a vegan. So when the guys say, you know, my dinner eats your salad, or
Mhm.
whatever the saying is, I think that what I would rather do, honestly, and not to circumvent the question, is to build a playbook and a roadmap that we can all stand behind, that has not been created formidably enough. And you can see by what support we're getting, the generosity from the industry, that I think that they're all willing to say, we're not willing to turn around and have a vegan diet, and we're not willing to turn around and live with an animal rights activist. We want to turn around and do what we do because we know it's right, and we stand it up, and we need to hold the values and morals and ethics of our forefathers back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, because what they did was the right thing. Now, are we going to prop it up? Are we going to support it? Are we going to try to carry it in perpetuity? Or are we going to let it be taken away? Because if it's taken away in this manner here, that they can turn around and define what the hell hunting is because of their interpretation of trophy, then where does it stop? And
And
I
I
think
think,
that everything that anybody did 125 years ago is a wasted effort if we don't turn around and stop it.
and for the trappers, I think it's a playbook, like you said. So I think the fact that you and Coloradans and nationally are trying to help figure out this playbook, because it's going to come and continue to come for trapping too.
Oh yeah.
Especially if this passes in Colorado, you know it's inevitable. So, folks listening, like, pay attention. It might not say trapping. It might not be about trapping specifically, even though it mentions in trapping in the definition. But I just want people to be aware that it's coming for us too. So we need to
Well,
support.
and let me throw something out, because there's another component of the measure that doesn't read in the title. Hence, we fought through the title board. We could try to alter the title, but we can't change the measure. There's another component in the measure that talks about dogs, and it
Mm.
talks about the not being able to utilize dogs with electronic collars and tracking devices. If this is statutory, tell me how that wouldn't turn around and flow into cattle dogs, for that matter, if anybody's using a training device, or waterfowl dogs, or upland bird dogs, or rabbit dogs. I mean, anytime anybody's using a bird dog now, they have a collar on them because they want to turn around and keep that dog close proximity, and they don't want him to stray on other pieces of property. They don't want him to go after unwarranted game or whatever. Stop and think about the repercussions of, well, you won't be able to use dogs. Now they're talking about lions and bobcats here, but if they change the statutory definition and this sets a precedent, this is not about dogs. It's not about mountain lions and bobcats. It's about all of it because of the definition that they throw out about hunting, which is what they're defining as trophy hunting.
Well, folks listening, take heed. We do have a historical precedence that we need to stand up for, the rights that we have as outdoorsmen and women. Dan, where can people find out more about this specific fight and some of the other things that you have going on where they might be able to lend support, or if you have any raffles or anything coming up that they might be able to join in on? Let people know, and then I'll put them in the show notes as well afterwards.
Appreciate that. And the biggest thing is people say that we might be, money hungry sons of bitches. And well, we are right now because we are fighting a juggernaut of national funding that's coming in. Now, what I would say is we've taken funding in from 50 states and 6 Canadian provinces of people that have a vested interest in Colorado because they apply for licenses here, they hunt here, they're getting preference points here. What they do here. I mean, 250,000 non-resident sportsmen and women applying for tags here have a vested interest. If people are concerned about what we're dealing with, they can't vote here if they live out of state. So the only thing they can do is either contribute, which we much need. And if they want to contribute, they can go to savethehuntcolorado.com. That's our website. There's multiple things on there that they can get. There's 2 different raffles that you can purchase. One is a mountain lion hunt with a full body mount with Whitaker Brothers Outfitting and Ovis Wildlife Taxidermy. Full donation. SCI is running the raffle for us. And another one is from Gunworks on a 7 PRC rifle, Gunworks rifle with a high dollar scope that Gunworks and Salida Gun Shop are donating. The Colorado chapter of SCI is gracious enough, generous enough to be able to turn around and run those raffles for us. Every single dollar that goes to the raffles goes to this fight. If you don't like raffles, or if you live in Washington or Hawaii where you can't do an online raffle, you can turn around and just donate. There's a donate button. It's not tax deductible. You'll get a receipt and a printout of it. All the money turns around and goes toward the fight. There's also a shop page on there if you want to support the efforts and you don't like to turn around and donate and you don't want to raffle. You can buy a t-shirt or a tumbler or something to be able, all the money. That's a donated shop site from one of our listeners out of North Dakota that turned around and put this thing together. They set it up. They're running it. Every single dollar, every single dime goes to Save the Hunt with CRWM. There's 3 different options there. Outside of that, educate your people that you know and don't let them happen. Don't let this happen to where it's happening in Colorado and happening in your state. If you know people in Colorado, let them know. Vote no on this. Don't support it. This is not science-based wildlife management. And there's a couple things that people need to know about, and we can get into this down the road. But there's also a fur ban ballot initiative in the city of Denver this year. The fur ban ballot initiative is fur fiber. Stop and think of that. Cowboy hats, beaver felt cowboy hats, fly fishing lures, fly tying stuff. And Native American crafts and artifacts. There's a slaughterhouse ban that's on a ballot initiative to ban one slaughterhouse in the city limits of Denver that's been there over 90 years that does lamb slaughterhouse, the largest in the Western United States. They're attempting to screw with our food, our fiber, and our conservation and hunting practices on 3 different issues. And we need as much as help as we can possibly get because if they win on one, they're likely to turn around and snowball that. But if they win on the bobcat and the mountain lion deal, you will see a snowball, probably not just in the West, but they're going to start pulling all the stops out because they can set the precedent on the statutory definition. So we'd ask for everybody's help in whatever they can provide. SaveTheHuntColorado.com. Help us help you to make sure that we put these efforts and thwart their efforts and stall their progress before it becomes some sort of monumental task on their end. Help us make it a monumental task on our end.
I love it. I mean, I hate the circumstances in which we're having this conversation, but folks listening, go support, educate, and Dan, thank you so much for your time going on all the different podcasts you are and all the different efforts. So thank you for being on the show. I learned a lot from you. It sounds like we need a part two down the road to talk about so much more going on, but thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to working with you. And as I always say with everybody, stay the course and aim small, miss small. Don't let the flag die.
Good words to end on. Thank you, Dan.